My parents forced me to pay all the debts they secretly racked up in my name, claiming, "We needed help, and you weren't using your credit." I found out when my card got declined at the grocery store. When I confronted Mom, she said, "We thought you'd understand." So I froze my accounts. When they begged, I said, "You're making it sound worse than it was," my mom said, her voice trying to walk the line between gentle and defensive. "I'm not making it sound anything, Mom," I said, standing in their outdated kitchen. "I'm just describing what actually happened." "You weren't even using your credit," she added, eyes darting away like she couldn't believe I was forcing this confrontation. "I wasn't using it," I repeated, "because I was trying to keep it clean. I'm 34 years old, living in Pittsburgh, and until recently, I had a great credit score, zero debt, and a reasonable nest egg growing in my savings account. I'm not rich, but I've been disciplined. I work full-time as a systems analyst for a healthcare logistics company. I live alone, I budget carefully, and I'm a bit of a control freak about my finances, for good reason, as it turns out. I grew up in Erie, Pennsylvania, small town, lots of lake wind, rough winters, and tighter budgets. My parents, Marla and Vincent, have always been the type to cut corners and pray the corners don't collapse. We were never homeless, but it was never secure either. I started noticing the signs when I was a teenager: bills being pushed around, late notices ignored, envelopes hidden at the bottom of junk drawers. There was always some new money problem, but they'd never explain it. It became part of the background noise of our family life. So I learned to take care of myself. I worked all through college, lived frugally, didn't buy a new car, and kept my expenses low. I've never had to ask them for money. Apparently, they can't say the same. About 7 months ago, I was doing a regular grocery run at the Giant Eagle near my apartment. Nothing special. I filled my cart, went to check out, swiped my credit card, and it was declined. I tried again. Declined. I was embarrassed, assuming maybe my bank flagged something by mistake. I paid with a backup debit card and left confused, but not panicked. The panic came later. That night, I logged into my credit account and saw my balance had been maxed out. A line of credit I didn't remember opening had a $12,000 balance. Then I checked my credit report. That's when the floor dropped out. There were credit cards and lines of credit in my name I'd never signed up for. Home Depot, Macy's, Best Buy, even a Shell gas card. Balances ranging from $800 to nearly $8,000. In total? Just under $40,000 in my name, money I had never spent. I couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking. My first instinct was that it was identity theft, some random stranger. But as I looked closer, something felt familiar. The mailing address on the accounts was my parents' old house in Erie. The security questions? Those were things only my family would know. I called my mom. At first, she tried to act confused. Then, like the truth had been cornered, she sighed and said, "We didn't think it would be a big deal. We thought you'd understand." Understand what, exactly? That they'd stolen my identity? That they'd taken tens of thousands of dollars in my name, fully knowing they'd never pay it back? I was furious. But more than anything, I was heartbroken. My own parents had violated my trust in the most insidious way. I drove to Erie the next morning, shaking the entire way. When I got to their house, it looked exactly the same. A little more run down than I remembered, but familiar, which somehow made it worse. I walked through the door and into what felt like a memory that had soured. My mom was at the kitchen table, like always, and my dad was in the garage. The conversation was short, quiet, and devastating. They admitted to opening the accounts in my name over the last few years. My mom said they were struggling with mortgage payments and the costs of repairs on the house. My dad claimed it was temporary, they always planned to pay it back. "Then why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Why wait until I find out by accident?" There was no good answer. Just excuses. Justifications. "We raised you. You make good money now. You weren't using the credit. It's not like we bought luxury stuff. But they did. The credit reports showed new appliances, electronics, home repairs, and even dental work my father had needed last year. All of it, in my name. I told them I had to protect myself. That I was freezing my credit. Reporting the fraud. That it didn't matter if they were my parents, what they'd done was illegal, and it could ruin me. They looked at me like I was turning my back on them. But here's what I want people to understand: when someone steals from you, even if it's just your parents, it's not love. It's not family. It's betrayal. Plain and simple. Over the next few weeks, I filed the necessary reports with the credit bureaus. I disputed the accounts. I submitted police reports, per creditor requirements, and gave statements. It was humiliating. These companies asked me questions like, "Are you sure you didn't authorize this?" Or, "Could someone in your household have done it?" And I had to say, over and over, yes. My parents did. They started calling me not long after. My dad first, saying they were being pestered by collectors. My mom sent guilt-laden voicemails, saying she didn't sleep, that they were losing everything. That I could make it all go away if I just took care of the accounts. But I wouldn't. Because what they did was wrong. And if I fixed it, I'd be telling them it was okay. They didn't see it that way. They said I was punishing them. That I was turning my back on my family. And maybe I am. Maybe I have to. Because family shouldn't do this to you. They stopped calling for about a week after I told them I wouldn't be responsible for any of it. I figured they had finally accepted that I wasn't going to cave. But then the letters started. Handwritten ones from my mom. Long, emotionally loaded pages filled with talk about sacrifice, memories, and all the things they did for me when I was just a little girl. She wrote about packing my lunches, buying me new sneakers even when money was tight, staying up late to help with school projects. She listed every single thing that a parent is supposed to do, like it came with a price tag I was now expected to pay off. In one of the letters, she wrote, "We never asked you for much, Sasha. We just needed a little help when things got hard." I don't know what stung more, the manipulation or the fact that she actually believed what she was saying. That she saw herself as the victim. That she genuinely thought she could put this on me and not see how deeply wrong it was. Meanwhile, my credit was still in limbo. Even though I filed police reports and got copies of everything to the banks, some of the companies didn't want to release me from the debt without pressing charges. A few did, after weeks of paperwork and phone calls. Others? Not so easy. There was one card from a department store that kept pushing back, saying they couldn't verify that fraud had occurred. "Did anyone else have access to your information?" they asked again. I said yes. My parents. And every time I said it, it felt like a cut. I spent evenings combing through statements, highlighting charges I didn't make. I found recurring charges for cable and utilities that were still linked to my name and address in Erie. I moved out over a decade ago. I hadn't thought to check those. They had kept my name active on household bills all that time. That meant my credit history was intertwined with theirs in ways I hadn't realized. It wasn't just credit cards. It was phone bills, electric accounts, a damn internet provider I hadn't used since college. Each discovery felt like its own betrayal. Like peeling back layers of an onion and finding mold under each one. I froze everything. I contacted every bureau and financial institution I could think of. I added fraud alerts. I got a lawyer. And still, there were nights I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering what I had done to deserve this. And then came the tipping point. One afternoon, I got a call from a collections agency, not for one of the credit cards, but for an overdue personal loan. Taken out in my name. $9,000. I had never applied for a personal loan. I felt my throat tighten as the agent explained the default status, the date it was taken out, and the fact that the bank had verified ID over the phone. That loan? It was used to cover roof repairs on my parents' house, about a year and a half ago. I confirmed the contractor's name, then searched my email inbox. Nothing. Of course not. Because it wasn't me. At that moment, something in me hardened. This wasn't just a desperate couple trying to survive. This wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. This was systematic. A long, premeditated siphoning of my identity, masked as family reliance. I was used to it. Quietly. Repeatedly. And all while they smiled to my face, sent me Christmas cards, asked about work, complimented how responsible I was with money. The worst part? I had believed that. I had believed they respected how I'd built my life from scratch. I thought they were proud. Instead, they were quietly dismantling the very thing they praised me for. I started seeing a therapist around this time. A friend recommended her, someone who specializes in adult children of manipulative or emotionally toxic parents. At first, I felt guilty even talking to someone about it. I still had this ingrained belief that I was being overdramatic or ungrateful. But the therapist was calm, non-judgmental. She asked the right questions. Do you think love should come with a debt? I didn't answer. I just sat there, blinking hard. That's the thing, you grow up with people who tell you that family is everything, that you owe them because they gave you life. And it takes years, sometimes decades, to realize that no one, not even the people who raised you, has the right to harm you just because they changed your diapers. In my second session, she said something else that stuck. People who betray you will always frame your boundaries as cruelty. That was my parents, exactly. The moment I stopped enabling their behavior, they accused me of turning on them. Of being selfish. Cold. Ungrateful. And they never once said sorry. They still haven't. Around that time, my cousin Rachel reached out. She still lives in Erie and had heard through the family grapevine that I was causing trouble for my parents. That I had reported them and left them to drown in debt. I didn't defend myself. I just asked her if she wanted the whole story. To her credit, she said yes. We met at a diner off 12th Street. I brought printouts, copies of the credit report, police statements, and the lawyer's letter. I laid it all out. She didn't say much at first. Just sat there, stunned. Then she looked up and said quietly, "They told us you loaned them money. That you were being vindictive when they couldn't pay you back." I nodded. That's the version they'd prefer. It makes me the villain. She apologized, not for them, but for believing them without asking me. We talked for hours that night. She told me about how, even within the family, my parents had always borrowed and dodged. There were other stories. Quiet ones. I wasn't the first target. Just the biggest one. I left the diner feeling less alone. But also angrier. Because I realized that even with everything exposed, my parents weren't sorry. They were still spinning their version of the truth, still trying to make it seem like I was the problem. Still trying to manipulate everyone around them into seeing their lies as unfortunate accidents. They called again 2 weeks ago. My dad this time. He left a voicemail. "I know we messed up, Sash. We weren't trying to hurt you. But we're about to lose everything. Can you at least just cover the minimum payments until we figure it out?" I didn't respond. Not yet, anyway. I still don't know what I'll say. Or if I'll say anything at all. They've already taken enough from me. I started writing everything down. Not because I wanted revenge, and not because I needed to vent, but because I was losing track of it all. The calls, the letters, the names of the creditors, the dates, it all began to blur together. I kept a spiral notebook next to my bed and added to it almost daily. Every call. Every charge I disputed. Every voicemail transcribed word for word. I needed a record. Something outside of my memory that reminded me this really happened, that I wasn't overreacting. Some nights, I'd lie awake rereading the entries just to ground myself. I'd spent so many years assuming my parents would never do something like this that I almost couldn't trust my own judgment anymore. That notebook became the only place that didn't gaslight me. My therapist said it was a good idea. She said when you're raised by people who manipulate your reality, documentation can be a lifeline. It lets you track the truth when your brain tries to rewrite it out of guilt. Because, yes, even after all of this, the debt, the lies, the betrayal, I still felt guilty. That guilt came in waves. Sometimes I'd be fine for days, moving forward, going through my adult life like nothing happened. I'd make a healthy dinner, pay a bill, and meet a friend for a movie. Then I'd see an older couple at the grocery store helping each other load groceries into their car, and it would hit me. That should have been my parents. That should have been us. Other times, it was small, crap things. Seeing their birthday reminders pop up on Facebook. A scent that reminded me of my mom's old perfume. The sound of my dad's voice when a commercial used a similar tone. I didn't even know grief could show up like that, tied to people who were still alive. They were still alive. Just not in my life. And that was a new kind of death to mourn. Rachel called again about a month after our diner talk. She had visited them and told me they were in rough shape. The bankruptcy proceedings had started. They were behind on utilities. My mom had taken up working part-time at a dry cleaner, and my dad was doing odd jobs through a temp agency. She said, "They're not well, Sasha. Your mom looks like she's aged 10 years. I didn't say anything. Then she asked, "Would you consider just talking to them again? No money. Just a conversation." That was the first time I allowed myself to consider it, talking. No agreement, no forgiveness, just a talk. Not because I wanted to reconcile, but because I needed to hear what they'd say now, months later. Has anything changed? Had they grown? Reflected? I said I'd think about it. And I did. 4 days. I imagined sitting across from them. I imagined what I might say, how I'd hold my posture, how I'd keep my voice calm and level. I even rehearsed lines in the mirror. You hurt me more than you'll ever admit. I didn't deserve what you did. You don't get to rewrite the story. But I also imagined them deflecting again. Saying things like, "We were desperate. You don't understand how hard things were. We thought we were doing what was best." That's the line that haunted me the most. We thought we were doing what was best. That's the language of people who can justify anything. They thought the opening credit in my name was best. They thought stealing my future for their present was best. They thought lying to me for years, every birthday, every Christmas, every visit, was somehow fine, because their need outweighed my right to know. In one of her letters, my mom actually wrote, "Sasha, parenting isn't always perfect. Sometimes we make mistakes out of love." And the thing is, that's true. Parenting is imperfect. People screw up. But what they did wasn't a mistake. It was a strategy. A long-term decision. An ongoing campaign of dishonesty, masked as family survival. Mistakes happen once. What they did happened for years. I still hadn't responded. In my next therapy session, I asked if healing required forgiveness. She gave me the best answer I've ever heard. No. Healing requires truth. Forgiveness is optional. I didn't know what truth even looked like in my family anymore. So instead of jumping straight to rebuilding, I started by detaching. I removed them from emergency contacts. I had to call my HR department and update my records. They were still listed as next of kin from back when I joined the company. I deleted their old emails, blocked unknown numbers that kept calling late at night, and shredded the remaining physical mail they sent. There's something heartbreaking about throwing away a birthday card from your mother while knowing it's laced with manipulation. There was a check in one of them, post-dated for a week later, for $200. In the memo line, it read, "See? We're trying." I never cashed it. I didn't even know if it would bounce. Rachel, bless her, kept trying to mediate. She wasn't pushy, but I could tell she was uncomfortable being the middleman. She believed what they did was wrong. But she also believed they were sorry, or at least, scared enough to act sorry. Maybe they were. But I wasn't looking for an apology made of desperation. I wanted one built from accountability. So far, they haven't shown that. I started focusing on rebuilding my own financial stability. My lawyer helped remove most of the fraudulent debt, but my credit score still bore the scars. Some things were resolved quickly, others lingered. My auto insurance premium increased because my credit dipped. I got declined for a travel rewards card I'd been planning to apply for. Just little constant reminders of what they did. At work, I became more private. I stopped volunteering for group lunches. I ignored happy hour invites. I didn't want to explain what I was going through, not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't want to have to justify why I wasn't ready to move on. Financial torment by family members isn't something people talk about openly. If I had said, my boyfriend maxed out my credit cards, everyone would have rallied. But when you say, my parents did it, people tilt their heads, like maybe you're exaggerating. You're not. They just don't want to believe it's possible. It was late September when I saw them again. By then, it had been nearly a year since the grocery store incident. The seasons had turned, the bankruptcy had been finalized, and they had moved out of the house I grew up in, sold for far below market value to cover part of the debt. A cousin told me they were renting a cramped duplex near 26th Street in Erie, not far from the old high school. They hadn't reached out directly in months. But one afternoon, I received an envelope in the mail. Inside was a handwritten letter from my father. The writing was neat, careful. It had always been Mom who did the writing and the talking. Seeing my father's handwriting, shaky but deliberate, felt like opening a door to a part of him I'd forgotten existed. He didn't beg. He didn't defend what they'd done. He didn't even ask for forgiveness. He just said this: we were wrong. I knew it was wrong. I told myself it was temporary. Your mother convinced herself it was for the family. I let it happen. I was a coward. I hope someday you find peace, whether or not it includes us. I read it twice. Then I put it down and cried in a way I hadn't allowed myself to in months, not just from pain, but from the release of finally hearing someone name the truth without asterisks or excuses. Still, I didn't call. I wasn't interested in rebuilding trust. But I was interested in something else: closure. And maybe control. You see, all this time, I'd been reacting. Cleaning up the mess. Explaining myself to creditors, to HR, to my daughter. Navigating guilt and outrage and shame. It was exhausting. But now that I had regained stability, financially, emotionally, I realized I had something they didn't. Power. Not the kind they had when they stole my identity and credit. The real kind: freedom. Independence. Clarity. And a clean conscience. So I made a decision. I hired a financial educator who specialized in identity theft victims. She helped me map out a long-term plan, not just to repair my credit, but to leverage the situation. Together, we drafted a workshop proposal: when family breaks the bank, protecting yourself from financial torment by those closest to you. I pitched it to my company's HR as a lunch and learn event. They said yes. Then I pitched it to a local women's shelter in Pittsburgh. They said yes. Then I got invited to speak at a small nonprofit event in Cleveland. I never used my parents' names. Never told the full story in public. But I told enough. Enough to be useful. Enough to help others see the warning signs, and to act before it was too late. And here's the best part: every time I stood at a podium or logged onto a Zoom workshop, I got to take back a piece of what they tried to take from me: my voice. My autonomy. My story. One day, I got an email. It was from a local news site that had heard about my workshop. They wanted to do a short piece on unseen financial torment. I gave a brief interview, using only my first name. The article was shared over 40,000 times. 3 days later, my mom called. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. I read the article, she said. Her voice was tight, almost trembling. I can't believe you would air this in public. Do you have any idea how this makes us look? I listened to the message twice. Then I saved it to a file titled, Proof. She hadn't changed. Not really. Even after everything, her first instinct wasn't to ask how I was doing, or to acknowledge what they did again. It was to worry about how she looked. That's when I knew for sure I didn't owe her anything. The final step of my closure plan wasn't loud or dramatic. It was simple. I sent her a letter. Handwritten, sealed with no return address. It said, Mom and Dad, I heard your voicemail. Please know that I'm not sharing my story to hurt you, only to help others. You hurt me, deeply, and you never truly made it right. That's okay. I've stopped expecting you to. But I will not be silenced, shamed, or guilt for telling the truth. Your shame is not my responsibility. I wish you peace. Sasha. I never heard back. And that was fine. A few months later, I got approved for a credit card with a decent limit and a travel rewards bonus. My score had rebounded. My savings were back on track. I took Callie on a weekend trip to Washington, D.C. She loved the museums, and we took silly pictures in front of the Lincoln Memorial. At dinner one night, she asked, Do you think Grandma and Grandpa will ever visit again? I thought for a moment. I don't know, I said. But either way, we're going to be okay. She nodded, like it made perfect sense. We paid the bill. With my card. In my name. And walked out into the city lights, free.